From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome once again to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis. So happy to have you back with us again. It has been, let's just call it, an eventful week in Chicago and Illinois. You know, Tribune Publishing wasn't the only outfit that changed its name. Governor Rauner involuntarily changed the name of CPS from Chicago Public Schools to Crumbling Prison System. And they weren't happy about that for some reason, and we will try to figure out what that's all about. We have two experts from both sides of the thing, the nexus between Springfield and Chicago. And when you're in that nexus, you got to talk a lot about schools. And when you talk about schools, you got to talk to Lauren FitzPatrick from the Chicago Sun-Times. Glad to have you back. Thank you for coming back. And also Kim Geiger is joining us from the Chicago Tribune, and Kim Geiger covers Springfield and the state in Chicago and all that kind of stuff, right? So you're sort of all over the place. You
Yep.
drive back and forth to Springfield a lot?
I do.
I'll bet you do. You know, there should be special pay just for having to do that. That is America's worst drive, Chicago to Springfield. Well, anyway, yes, we have a governor who has kind of, well, Kim, you got to explain this to me. One day the governor is cowering in the corner and being defensive and whimpering and saying, I just want to get the state working again, but these vile people in the legislature, they won't work with me. And the next day he's out on the campaign trail bashing Chicago and saying that it's all those awful people in Chicago. I can't keep them all straight. Where's the governor today? What's going on now?
The governor today is in Springfield. He's been there for the past couple of days. He has been going back and forth, but I think if you look at it, you need to look at the whole situation from the perspective of November and beyond. The governor
You mean the upcoming November?
Yes, the upcoming November, and then what happens after November. So the governor is a Republican, and he is dealing with a legislature that has supermajorities among Democrats in both chambers. And in order for him to really be able to dictate what he wants to happen in Springfield, he really needs to reduce the majorities in the House and the Senate if he can. So for the governor, the incentive here is to try and pick off some Democrats where he can, and Chicago isn't really the area where he's going to be able to do that. This is a Democratic presidential year. Down ballot Democrats tend to do well in these years, and Chicago is a very strong Democratic base anyway. So he's essentially kind of sacrificing his standing in Chicago in order to boost his appeal to the other suburban and downstate areas.
I think I get it.
In a way that he could then maybe gain some seats down in those areas. And
Kim, are you telling us that at this time when we should be governing, that our principal activity is political? Are you saying it's politics?
Well, it's always politics.
Oh, okay. All right. It is politics. So, Lauren, give me your take on this. I mean, am I wrong when I say that most of the conversation between Illinois and Springfield is schools? I mean, it's all about the schools, isn't it?
I mean, maybe, but what's funny lately is that all the talk at the schools is Springfield. I mean, that's the point of view I'm coming at this from, right? Anytime I talk to Forrest Claypool or any of the other leaders at CPS, I mean, if I drank every time they said Springfield, I wouldn't be able to walk out of their office at the end. I mean, Forrest is constantly saying all roads lead to Springfield. He finally went down there. He's been pushing, parents to call legislators. I don't remember that in, the couple of years I've been covering this beat. I can't remember a time when the focus has been on the state.
Well, that raises an interesting question because Forrest Claypool, of course, has said that all the principals have to prepare these draconian, like 30 or whatever it is, 30% cut budgets. And it does raise the question of whether that's real or whether that is political posturing, that he wants to make it clear to every parent and everybody who cares about this that unless Springfield caves and gives them what they want, we're just going to stop. We're just going to stop opening schools.
Right. Well, I mean, it's both. I think it is both. I think some of it is that the last budget cuts are what pulled a lot of parents on board who aren't necessarily normally the types who are going to pick it outside of a legislator's office or get on the phone or get on the bus downstate. But he does have a point that if the state does nothing And then if the city doesn't come through too, and that's the part we could also talk about, like the city's role in all of this, then these schools are going to be stuck with terrible budgets, which on average are like 26% cuts, I think, is what schools will actually feel.
Related to that, we're seeing stories, and you've written about this, Lauren, and again, it's one of those things where I just kind of ask, is this indicative of something bigger or not? It's this question about what appears to be the racing for the doors from a lot of principals. Catalyst is reporting this morning that there are 54 principals who are leaving voluntarily, not retiring, but actually just leaving the system. Right. And those include the principals of Lane, Lakeview, Schurz, Foreman, elementary schools like Palmer and Edison Park. I mean, these are how do we put this?
A couple of those are
the better off schools.
A couple of them are pretty plum assignments.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 500-ish principals in CPS-run schools.
That's not charters then, that's just CPS
that's
run.
Like the CPS-run schools, which are the ones we're talking about here, even though the charters are also going to feel cuts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the life cycle of a principal is such that, 5 or 6 years? I mean, how many principals make it through 2 actual terms? So to some extent, it's churn. And I mean, in the case of Lane Tech, for example, she is going to leave to follow her former boss, who used to run Lane Tech, who I think went to Deerfield and became the superintendent. So she got like a really nice job working for someone she already knows. Is that because of the budget, or is that because that's a really nice opportunity?
Yeah. That's something any of us would do.
I think it's something that people would consider. So I don't know. I have not I've not reported on this issue yet because I'm still on the fence about, is this just sort of normal? I mean, you look at numbers going back 5 or 6 years, and in 11 and 12, there were like 100-some principals who left because there was a retirement.
But a lot of that was retirement, though,
It was retirement.
Which is kind of a different animal.
But even in the last few years, at this point, the numbers aren't that much lower. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see by the end of the year.
And also, the Troy LaRaviere situation is going to be interesting because now you've got this kind of firebrand guy running the Principals Association. So, I mean, do you get a sense of whether that is going to will it have any impact on all these conversations we're having?
I mean, in terms of people leaving, no, I can't imagine. I can't imagine that anyone would base their job on Troy LaRaviere, who's, really vocal and one of the loudest critics of the Emanuel administration going back several years, would have any impact on their job. Whether he is able to broker a peace, I mean, he's shown that he's certainly able to wage war, whether he's able to broker a peace and really be an advocate for these principles, and whether he's able to tone it down enough so that real conversations can be had, because once you have people's attention, then what are you going to say to them? Remains to be seen. But the night that he won, he took to his blog, as he's wont to do, and wrote out, here are my plans and here's what I'm thinking. And he did include a few lines about, when I was speaking on behalf of myself, I speak in a certain way. Now I'm here to speak on behalf of you. I promise it will be different. We'll see.
Yeah.
That said, he was outside the Board of Ed just yesterday morning.
Was he?
Making a ruckus about, the Aramark contract, the school cleaning contract.
So, I mean, as has been said by others, does Rahm Emanuel have 2 Karen Lewises on his hands now?
Maybe. Maybe.
Only time will tell.
Time will tell.
So, Kim, the big news this week, as I understood it, and again, just kind of going back to this, we're just randomly hitting these things here, but there was supposed to be some kind of big meeting yesterday, right? That in Springfield, or something, I don't know, because Mike Madigan said we don't need to have the House come back in, even though they're scheduled to, because we're making such progress that we're going to have this big meeting. And I'm confused. I don't even. Did they have a meeting?
Sure. So what has been happening for the past months and months, but really sort of ramped up in the past couple of weeks, is these working groups of rank and file lawmakers who've been getting together and negotiating on the budget, spending, revenue, but also on the turnaround agenda items that the governor wants: workers' comp reform, a property tax freeze with limits on collective bargaining for local governments. And so these working groups have been meeting and they have been negotiating. Nothing has really come from the working groups. But what happened on Tuesday last week, the last day of the session, was that the governor proposed, he came out and he said, I would be willing to do like a 6-month stopgap budget to get the state through the end of the year. And I also want a full year spending bill for K through 12 education. And Speaker Madigan said, okay, I'm gonna punt this to the working groups essentially. And the working groups got started talking about it. So that's what was going on yesterday, was that you had these groups of rank and file lawmakers talking about how to get this stopgap budget deal done and also this one-year education plan.
Now, is this all behind closed doors? I mean, you can't go and watch them do their job.
Right, it's not like it's a committee hearing, it's a private negotiations, and notably the leaders are not actually in the room, but they have dispatched like their staff and sort of loyal lawmakers, so they're not completely removed from it, but the idea is that things are so charged between the governor, the speaker, the Senate president, that taking them out of the equation and having just the rank and file do it.
Is this the equivalent of the mayor telling Ed Burke to push something off into the finance committee where it will die? I mean, is that what it is? Is that what this thing is, or is it real?
Well, it's real in the sense that there is no budget for state government. And at a certain point, that's going to become a serious problem. So something needs to be done, particularly as it relates to school spending. And the House passed a spending bill that included school money for schools, but it also included like billions of dollars for other things, and there was no way to pay for it. The Senate didn't even approve it. The Senate went ahead and passed their own education spending bill. So there is no actual bill on the governor's desk that he could sign that would get money to schools.
Because the House didn't approve the thing that the Senate did.
Right,
school,
exactly.
Right?
The two sides couldn't agree on how they wanted to do this. All they really agreed on is that they want to give more money to CPS, a lot more money to CPS. But they couldn't agree on sort of the vehicle for how they wanted to do it, whether it was going to be all wrapped up into one big budget bill or if it was going to be a separate education spending bill, what the amounts would be. And so nothing ended up on the governor's desk right now. And so now you're looking at the school year starting. So at some point, theoretically, something has to happen.
So this thing that's going on where one house is passing something and the other is not passing it, you're saying that is a genuine philosophical difference about how to do things, and it's not just a game they're playing to run the clock out all the way down to November?
Well, depends on who you talk to. If you talk to the governor, he would say that they're slow walking it and that they're playing a game. I think what we saw on Tuesday was a legit meltdown on the part of the Democratic majority, just an inability to agree on what was the way that they were going to come at this. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that the governor had said, after the House passed their budget bill, it was like a week before the end of session, the governor came out and said, I'm going to veto that. So you had the Senate sitting there looking at this bill thinking, if we pass this bill and it goes to the governor, it's going to be vetoed anyway. So there wasn't a whole lot of incentive at that point for the two sides to get together and do this when it was all really just going to be more show.
I've been wanting to ask you about this for a long time. Is Forrest Claypool a player in Springfield? I mean, he is a real kind of nuts and bolts behind the scenes sort of guy. And he's got a pretty good political sense. Is he playing hard down in Springfield?
He's talking a lot about Springfield. He's only physically gone down to Springfield but once this spring session. I'm trying to remember if he went earlier. I don't have a good handle on whether you need to turn up to actually be a big player there, but I tend to think his sway is much greater in the city, which is why he has enlisted a troop of superintendents who are in districts. I wouldn't say they're similar to CPS really in any way other than they've got a lot of poor kids. And they're saying that the existing state funding formula is hurting them in order to benefit sort of other districts that are wealthier. So he's pulled together this group of people, I think, to take some of the focus away from this is a Chicago problem, this is a Chicago bailout, this is, the fault of the mismanagement up in the city kind of idea.
Yeah.
I mean, he pulled in one district from Pana, Illinois, which I had to look up. I had never heard of it before.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the Aurora districts and some more suburban Chicago, and Taylorville and Peoria is on that list too. So,
well, I got to say that that strikes me as being a very astute political thing to do, because when Governor Rauner is traveling around the state, as he has been, saying, you good, hard-working people here in rural Illinois who pay your taxes, implication, unlike people in Chicago who don't pay their taxes, you people are the good people, and Chicago wants to steal your money. Well, if Forrest Claypool can have this meeting of people from all over the state who, like his district, are having problems with being able to educate their low-income kids, and there are low-income kids all over the state, then it kind of just makes a lie to that statement from the governor.
that's what he's trying to do anyway.
Yeah.
That's what he's been trying to do for a couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me that there appear to be a lot of superintendents who are willing to get on that bus, who think it's a good idea to be aligned with him.
I think, though, I mean, these are the superintendents, though, whose districts have so many low-income kids and whose property tax wealth is not able to do the job, that these are the districts that will not be able to open their doors unless some kind of state money comes through. I mean, there are plenty of districts in the state where they would feel a pinch if there's nothing coming from Springfield, but basically they're supporting themselves off of their own local revenue. Claypool has found a bunch of these places where they're stuck.
Yeah, well, and that I guess you made my point far more eloquently than I did. That the point is simply that for so long, when you play the normal Illinois politics of the state versus the city of Chicago, places like Peoria and I don't want to name one after another, but there are many medium to larger cities in Illinois that are in just as bad a shape. And
there are one or two districts who have a higher concentration, a higher percentage of low-income kids than Chicago, and a whole bunch more, 4 or 5 more that are right on the heels.
Amazing, it is, and they just get forgotten in this whole conversation.
No, I don't think people think of poverty as being so widely spread in rural areas and in small and medium-sized cities.
Yeah. Now, Cullerton said something along these lines in the last few days about there are 3 things that he wants. He wants taxing ability. Well, tell us what those, if you remember them.
Sure.
Are there?
So this is what he wants. It's unclear how hard, where he draws the line. But what he's asking for is they want the General Assembly to give the Chicago City Council the ability to vote on a property tax increase.
Which I assume the mayor wants, right? He must want that too, because he knows he's going to have to do this, right?
Right.
But he can't, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But right now there's a ceiling and he can't, or well, not he, but the CPS cannot raise their taxes.
They need approval from the legislature in order to take this vote.
They're ceilinged out or whatever it is.
Yeah, and the Senate has already voted to do this, but this bill is stuck in the House, and it's another case of even if both chambers passed it, would the governor approve it? So they want the governor's backing of this idea. They also want pension parity for CPS, so they want state help paying for the pension costs for Chicago public schools. Those 2 things are very specific to Chicago. They relate just to Chicago. Then the third thing is that they want a formula change to the way that the money gets doled out to schools. And
all schools.
All schools. And Cullerton is really arguing that there's no special deal for Chicago there. That's just changing the way that the money goes out, and every school would benefit, or some schools, I guess, might lose out, but there's no special dealing for Chicago.
Now that's another one of these things where it appears to me that the governor's been squarely on both sides, right? I mean, at one point he said that he favored a new school funding formula, and then he didn't favor it. I don't know if it's just because he didn't get the one he wanted or what.
Well, so the governor's position on this is that the funding formula is bad, that it's a problem. But whenever he says that, he also makes a point of noting that the formula was there before he got into office, has been there for a long time, was created by Democrats. But yeah, he's opposed to the existing formula. He sees that there's inequities in the formula. But he doesn't want to, he also has said, it's going to take a long time. This is complicated stuff. This is a difficult thing to change. It's going to take a long time. In the meantime, we need to make sure that schools are opening. So he wants like this 1-year funding bill that would make sure, now he's saying, this is sort of new within the past couple of weeks, that the bill he wants would make sure that every school district got as much money as they got this year. Because like CPS is on, they would lose like $74 million or something according to the formula.
And that's why this all gets so complicated, isn't it? Because we've talked about this in the past. If you're Barrington, let's say, you get a certain amount of money from the state, but that amount of money, because of your property tax base, that could be 3% of your budget or something, right?
Yeah.
But if you're Ford Heights, that same amount of money coming in could be, I'm just making these numbers up, but it could be 50% or 60% of your budget or something.
Yeah.
So changing the formula affects school districts very differently, because if you took, I don't know, if you took $1 million away, I'm just crazily making up numbers, but if you took $1 million away from Barrington, it might not make much difference. If you took $1 million away from Ford Heights, it would make a huge difference. So the point is to try to even this out, right? Or not to even it out, but help me. I mean, I remember when Dawn Clark-Netsch ran for governor, and that was going to be her thing, was she was going to change the school aid formula, and she got killed for it. So maybe it's a kind of a third rail thing. I don't know.
I mean, if the point of state funding is to help kids in districts that aren't necessarily able to keep up with their needs, if that's the philosophy behind it, then the formula right now kind of doles out an equal amount of money per poor child, no matter where they are. So if you're in, let's say, Highland Park, and you have, let's say, a couple dozen children who are considered living in poverty, maybe you don't need quite as much help from the state catching those kids up and supporting them, as opposed to, and I just know Chicago the best, where 86% of your kids are poor. Yeah. You do need as much help as you can get, kind of leveling the playing field.
And that issue has just been around forever, and now what Governor Rauner seems to be saying is he's saying he could agree to increasing the amounts that the poorer schools get, as long as no school is harmed. So that would mean that the richer school districts would kind of be the anchor point then. They get to stay where they are, but everybody else gets to go up. I mean, it's...
Right, which that means spending a lot more money on education.
That's exactly,
and the state is currently spending more money than it actually brings in, and creating a backlog of bills, and unable to deal with the revenue question, and unable to deal with the budget.
But we always throw around these kind of really rubbery and vague factoids, truthiness, I guess it is, that Illinois is one of the worst states in the nation for education funding. I've always assumed that's true, but I don't know if it is. So what's the deal here? Why can't we fund our schools?
How many people have been trying to figure that out for the past, 3 decades? What Phil Cadner at the old Southtown used to talk about. I mean, his entire career he was trying to get at the root of what was up with school funding, and how come no one could get it right. So,
and it has been pointed out in the last couple of days, Illinois doesn't really have a budget problem. It has a pension problem, and the pension problem stems from the fact that for 30 or 40 years we've been shortchanging the inputs into the pensions, and that's because we're trying to put that money into other things, the schools or whatever it is, because there isn't enough money there in the first place.
Right. The state also has a pretty low state income tax rate. It's a flat tax, and it's low even compared to other states with flat taxes. So there's not a lot of income tax coming in, and then a quarter of every income tax dollar is going to pay for pensions. So you're left with 75 cents to run the government and social services and higher education and K through 12 and pay debt service and all that stuff.
We had Karen Lewis on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her point blank that I've seen her at various rallies saying, we need more help from Springfield, and we would really like to have CPS standing here with us, helping us on this. And then I watch Forrest Claypool having his own rallies and saying, we really need help from Springfield, and we wish that CTU was here with us to help lobby. Is that just a pipe dream? I mean, is there any possibility you could ever foresee the two of them standing at the same podium addressing the joint session of the legislature and saying, damn it, do something?
They haven't done it yet. They haven't
Why?
done it yet. I think, I mean, I'm inside of none of their heads, right?
Right, none of us are.
But Claypool definitely wants Springfield to act first, and then agrees with the mayor that the city will come correct afterwards, and then they'll work out the deal with the CTU, and everybody will do their part, but Springfield has to go first. The CTU is saying, no, Springfield, like, we can't count on them to do anything. We need to start helping ourselves first. So we need the city to start coming up with ways to generate revenue, because even if, and this is a point the union's making too, even if Springfield comes through on everything we want them to, it's still not going to be enough. There's still so much more to do. So, you know, we've got to get cracking in the meantime. So the timing is part of it. And then I think the union also is pushing for a lot more sources of revenue that the district is not necessarily looking at this time. You know, TIF surplus and the millionaire's tax are the ones that spring immediately to mind.
What did you make of Howard Brookins' introduction of race into the issue, and saying that really what this is all about is that our schools just have a lot of black and brown kids in them?
So I was sitting in an assembly at Whitney Young where I also heard that argument, but from a really unlikely place at CPS. It was Janice Jackson, who's like the number 2, you know, came up, teacher, principal, boss of principals, is a little bit understated, a little bit conservative, lets Forrest do the big talking most of the time. So she was in this student, you know, town hall over at the high school, and she pretty much said the same thing, which did resonate with me, because this is not someone who sticks her neck out very often to say much of anything. I mean, I don't know if it'll resonate or not with the people she is hoping it will.
Or with downstate legislators.
Or with downstate legislators. Maybe she feels a lot better just getting it off her chest. Maybe.
It may just be one of those days when it's like, oh, I'm just going to say this.
Although Claypool's been he's been tiptoeing around it. I mean, he's not necessarily the one to maybe come out and say it so forcefully, but he talks about, you know, 85% minority, 86% poor every chance he gets when he's talking about this funding.
I've wanted to ask you both about just the pure personalities. I mean, you know, it's been written so much about Rahm Emanuel and Bruce Rauner being friends. Bruce Rauner helped Rahm Emanuel get rich, and now they seem to be at odds with one another. I know, as you've already said, Lauren, you can't get inside any of their heads, but the personality bit just seems to be so big in this whole thing in Illinois. I mean, how do I get a handle on this? What can you tell me about Rahm and Rauner, and about, as I said, about Forrest Claypool and you know, the president of the CTU? I mean, these bigger than life personalities, and I well, not to mention Cullerton and Madigan. I just don't know where to. I don't know how much to put on that. Is it a bigger deal than we're making it, or not?
They are big egos.
They are.
The top 2 guys we're talking about, right? Rahm and Rauner, I mean, it is no surprise. And both are very much used to getting their own way. And up until now, both have, I think, in life, have very much gotten their own way. And now they meet. And now there are 73 million other factors at play and contingencies at play. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this idea came from on the governor's part that Rahm was supposed to be helping him get his agenda through the legislature.
Good point.
But he has this, he kind of threw that out there about a year ago and said, you know, you want things from me, then you got to help me. And maybe it's because they were friends or something, and he thought he could go to his friend and say, hey, help me out. But as an outsider, the request initially seemed unlikely to be productive. And so it's interesting viewing it through that lens now, because when he said, like the mayor was his biggest disappointment of his past 18 months.
Right, he just said that a couple of days ago, right?
Yeah,
like a week ago.
Which is interesting because the mayor actually, technically the mayor doesn't really have any power in Springfield. Yeah. Obviously he does, he has a lot of sway, but in terms of being able to accomplish things, the Speaker and the Senate President have way more ability to do that.
Yeah, and it does make one's eyes roll when you say, really? Rahm Emanuel is the biggest disappointment you've had since you've been governor? If I were governor, I'd be disappointed in the fact that we went an entire year without a budget. But
yeah, when he says it, it sounds like he sincerely thought that the mayor was going to help him out on this, and I don't really know what to make of that.
Then the zingers are just going back and forth.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the mayor on Chicago Tonight the other night, but then he starts talking about Rauner and Moby Dick and obsessions with taking all of us down to go after his great white whale. And, I had half an ear on the TV and then perked right up when I heard that, because I was thinking, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah, everyone has to fill space though when nothing's happening, so there's that too. Everyone has to make it appear as if they're, working on this. And
the level of naivete on my part here is just staggering. But why can't they just make some deals? Why can't, is it just simply, as you said at the beginning, because everybody's just waiting for November? Should we just shut the whole thing down and just say, okay, the schools aren't going to open, nothing's going to happen. If you're sick, you'll probably die, but in November we're going to pick this up and we're going to try to fix it again. Is that what it's come down to?
A lot, yeah, but you still do have this pressure point of schools needing to open, and you really can't have schools not opening, particularly when you have an election coming up in November. So there is still enough to get people to the table, but it is June.
So is that what they're going to do? They're going to come up with some crappy little deal just to throw enough money at the schools that they can get them open so that they can get couple of months of the schools operating? Is that the best we can hope for?
That seems to be, just from where I sit, what Rauner wants to be, like what he's been talking about, pushing through these Republican bills that would in fact float schools for long enough that they would be able to open in the fall. CPS would not be able, they would barely be able to open. There'd be seriously terrible cuts if this, if these plans were to go through. But that seems to be his latest thing, when he's been talking about all these other places versus Chicago, getting them all on board to, you'll be able to open, you'll be just fine if you sign on to this, because again, he doesn't have a lot to lose in Chicago.
Let's just talk for a minute about the dynamic between Cullerton and Madigan. Again, I can't understand whether they genuinely disagree about things or whether they're just kind of like playing a game. Why can't they have workable majorities? They may not be veto-proof, but they're good, solid majorities. Why can't they do things?
Well, now that we're in June, they need those super majorities. They can't, a simple majority doesn't do the job. So there's that.
That's a good point.
The dynamic, I think historically there has been a pattern where Madigan and the House at the last minute decide what the budget's going to be. They send it over to the Senate, and the Senate just goes ahead and approves it, even if they're not really on board with it or they don't think it's a great idea. There's a lot of lawmakers in the Senate who are really good budget minds and are really interested in this stuff and work really hard on it throughout the year. And I think those people are getting frustrated that every year they put all this work in and then at the end of the day they get a $7 billion out of balance budget and they're told take it or leave it. So there's that. There's also the Black Caucus in the Senate this year was taking issue with that dynamic as well. So I think that the Senate president is definitely contending with a caucus of people who want to have input and want to be productive and want to be creating some solutions. But they want to do that within the context of this larger political battle that, again, I think has to do with November and beyond. Because once the election comes and goes, we're still going to have this situation. There's still going to be, something's going to have to come from it. Right. So I'm not sure. I know that the governor does see it as a slow walk, and there is an element of the longer this goes, the more pressure it puts on him. So it's not the worst thing for the Democrats right now. But I'm not convinced that it's a intentional game that they're playing as much as just trying to contend with, there's a lot of members in the General Assembly.
That's a very interesting perspective, actually. I think that is really interesting. Well, I don't know where we go from here, none of us do, but it's just going to be something interesting to watch. Are schools going to open in September?
Yes.
They'll have to,
They
right?
have to.
They have to.
And if it were just Chicago we were talking about, I don't know what my answer would be at this time, but there's no way that all schools, most schools in Illinois are not going to be able to open in September. Yeah. We didn't even get into like the CTU. Now, is the CTU a factor in Chicago schools opening in September? It's still too soon to say. But I think school opens.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it just kind of got shoved out of our whole conversation. The ongoing negotiations between CPS and
Yes.
CTU. I mean, we just don't really have any sense of where that's at this point.
It's just a little bit stuck because they've, hammered out a bunch of details, but until CPS knows how much money it actually has, it can't really make decisions on how it's going to pay teachers or what it's going to demand from them. So really, until some of this other stuff shakes out, they just are in a holding pattern.
And
for a little
CTU
while
is not
longer.
going to willingly surrender something. They're not going to give something if they don't know what they're giving it for, right? I mean, if there was a framework saying, here's how much money we know we have,
right.
we want to do this, we want to do this, we both want to do this and this and this, so therefore we'll give up this little bit if you'll give up that little bit. But you can't have that conversation.
No, and Karen Lewis was out earlier this week, I think. The days are running together, saying, we don't what are we going to do? Make all these sacrifices and then you're going to cut, the heck out of our classrooms anyway? I mean, that's not something we're interested in signing on to either. Because
as she's pointed out, elimination of teacher positions is not something the contract deals with. I mean, they can do it. They can fire teachers for economic reasons. So all the time they're cutting down on the union membership, and that's a major concern for them.
And they sort of learned that lesson the hard way last time, right? Like they got some nice raises after the teacher strike, but then the city turned around and closed 50 schools, and a lot of those folks, a lot of people lost their jobs too. So I think the union a little bit is playing more of a long game. And as long as the district doesn't make any sudden moves, to cut anything that they currently have, the CTU is sort of, they're standing by. They're standing by.
I think if you look at what's on the table right now, you have the governor saying he wants to spend and not take any money away from schools and fund them for a year. And then you have Democrats saying they just want to send even more money to the schools. So you don't really have anyone in this equation saying we shouldn't fund the schools. So I find it hard to imagine a scenario where no funding bill for schools emerges from this. It's just a question of the timing and how long this goes, and
But I mean, just in practical terms, the schools have to know, I mean, probably hours from now, how much money they have before, they got to put an academic year together.
The funny thing is, if we go back to a year ago in CPS, when things were shuffled around a little bit around this time of year, I don't think principals got their budgets last year until July. I'm not saying it's optimal. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm saying CPS has done this before, and a lot of these folks sort of know how this is done. I don't know if smaller districts elsewhere in the state who are used to knowing what's going on because their districts run like clockwork, I don't know where they stand, but Claypool said he's got several more weeks. He's got probably until about July, late July, until real problems start to kick in.
I was mentioning to you before that I was reviewing the show that you were on about a year ago when it just looked like the world was about to end. There was just no possibility it could get any worse. And here we are a year later, and it's worse.
Yes, financially it's worse. Criminally, maybe it's calmed down a little bit. Some of that has gone away.
Right.
Claypool seems to be, he's settled in, he's got his people there. It's stabilized, except now the money blows up. But I mean, Ken, every year it's something.
Yeah. We're finishing up here, but of course I keep thinking of other little things I want to ask you. This thing about the privatization of the engineering and everything and the Sodexo contract. I mean, it seems to me like there's no real upside to doing it. The CPS doesn't really actually save any money in the end doing this.
And they've admitted it this time around that this expansion is not necessarily going to save any money, and that it's not their goal to save any money. But it's another show.
What is their goal?
It's another show, Ken. We just can't. We can't.
Can you give me a sentence?
I think their goal is just some outsourcing.
They just want to privatize the stuff.
Fewer things they would have to worry about.
Yeah.
Leave big problems about giant old crumbling school buildings, which, I'm not saying that to judge. I'm saying that some of these buildings are falling apart because they've not been invested in, could now become someone else's problem. And CPS can say, now it's your problem, fix it, tell us when you've done it.
Interesting, very interesting. Because that's exactly what I think might be happening when you could have like a team of engineers who sort of like run around just kind of keeping each plate spinning, I guess, as much as possible.
In theory, you could do that.
Right, yeah.
In practice?
In theory, yeah. Well, we'll have to do that other show sometime. It's a really interesting topic. Okay, I have one last question for you, Kim, which is about the question about what we just raised about here, the crumbling prisons. Did he mean to say that, or is that just something that just some prejudice that just stumbled out of his mouth? Was that a planned attack, or did he just reveal something that he believes?
I didn't get the sense that it was planned, no. Also, typically when the governor talks about Chicago public schools, he harps on the sort of financial mismanagement element of it. And I'm not sure I think he might have actually been referring to that, and just the fact that there hasn't been investment in the system, and that the district has been financially strained for a very long time.
Yeah.
And
I took it that way too. I didn't think that he was making like a racial remark or anything. He's making a remark about the terrible, deplorable condition of many of the schools.
Right.
And he's one of the few people in position to fix that if he wanted to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, if you take that comment with the things that just listening to him talk all the time, it fits more in that theme of that the district just hasn't been properly run, and that it's been mismanaged, and the crumbling.
And of course, these big old hulks, these behemoth schools, maybe the best thing we can do is knock them down and just build some nice, bright new charter schools. And I'll put some money into that.
There is that worldview as well.
Yes, there is. But that's a third show.
Another show.
Yeah, we're doing another show. Lauren, thank you very much. Okay. Lauren FitzPatrick, Chicago Sun-Times, being with us here today. Thank you very much. And Kim Geiger from the Chicago Tribune, who writes about all things Springfield, sometimes from Chicago, sometimes from Springfield, and spends a lot of time in her car. And we will be back next week with another show. I'm really grateful to these ladies for being here today. It was a very interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too, and I hope you'll be back with us next week. We'll have another program for you right here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis. Remember, you can always see us by going to this address, and you can watch any show anytime you want on any device. Ain't that cool? See you next week. Bye.